The term rare bird is really an umbrella title which includes a few different categories such as local, scarce, rare and mega. My record shots are exactly that. I'm not a photographer, so I apologise for the quality of some photos, but felt that these species warranted a mention. Most of the rare birds I've seen in the UK have been reported by our fantastic community of birders who tirelessly go out in their own time and really put a lot of effort into recording the birds at their site and also obviously reporting any rare birds that they've discovered. So for some a hobby, others an obsession and many a way of life. Most birders and twitchers keep life lists, patch lists, county lists, garden lists and many more. Year listing is a big one and is very rewarding, giving you a great excuse to get out and revisit a variety of different regions and habitats and at the same time hone your own skills over the 4 seasons. Twitching rarities can be a really exciting part of birding and can send you on many adventures to almost anywhere. And connecting with these almost mythical creatures is incredible. From the time a report comes in to when you get to see it, if life permits, you can often feel the adrenaline and anxiety increase nearer and nearer you get to your bird. However, the flip side of that coin can be very disappointing, and that disappointment has a scale from oh well I'll see it again to complete devastation, because some of these rarities are first for the UK. There's a big difference between say travelling 20 minutes for a bird that turns up in the UK annually say 20 times, which really does give you another opportunity to see it, versus travelling 8-9 hours, possibly having to get a boat, hiking out to an area and unfortunately missing the bird. But that is the risk we take when we twitch. It's risk versus reward. But unfortunately on those days we do dip on these birds, and it will happen. The more and more that you twitch birds, the odds are the more chances you have of actually missing it. And often the drive home is very long and coincidentally coincides with horrendous traffic, so that always gives you plenty of time to ponder your misery as you're getting nearer to home. So I've not always been a twitcher, and not all birders are twitchers and not all twitchers are birders, but for me personally it is very much part of my birding life, and hopefully I've got a healthy balance, but it sure doesn't feel like that sometimes. But to be honest, out of the last say 30 odd years that I've been seriously birding, 20 of those have been spent in completely different arenas. For 3 years I was a volunteer with the Strathcona Raptor Shelter out in Alberta, Canada, so that was from about 92 to 95. From 95 to about 2002, whilst I was back here in the UK, most of my time was actually spent ringing at a variety of different sites. And then from 2002 up to 2011, I spent in British Columbia, Canada, and immersed myself in North American birding. So to be honest, my UK life list is quite humble and pales in comparison with many of the birders and twitchers over here. But however, I've really enjoyed my time birding in these different areas, and I wouldn't change that for the world. My interest in birds, wildlife and the natural world really started when I was very young, but was very much parked during my adolescence and into my early 20s. Until it really came back to the forefront of my mind when I was actually I was posted out in Alberta, Canada, at a place called Nordegg, sort of near Rocky Mountain House. It's southeast of I think it's southeast of Jasper National Park in the Rocky Mountains. And while I was travelling back in a van, I spotted a great grey owl, and I'd never seen one before, but I immediately knew what it was. It's a very distinctive bird, But that was really the moment that, birds came back to the forefront of my mind. So from 92 to 95, I was a part of the Alberta Society for Injured Birds of Prey. And initially I was just sort of helping out at the shelter, doing odd jobs, a little bit of painting, repairing some of the aviaries, and but finally took a wildlife rehabilitation course, which allowed me to not only handle birds at the centre, but also gave me a permit, so I was able to pick up injured birds as well. This was a great opportunity to see some, not so much rare birds, but some wonderful birds, particularly the owl species, getting to handle things like great horned owl. We had a great grey owl come into the shelter. It had been in a vehicle collision, and luckily there was nothing broken, it was just a few bruises, but that was rehabilitated and released. So, again, such a privilege to handle and see these birds up close. Other species such as snowy owl came into the shelter. That's the thing, living in Alberta, the weather sometimes in the winter could be horrendous, and when you get that really hard crust of ice on top of the snow, it's really tough for these birds to get down to their prey, and so often we would get owls in that were emaciated, and we would refeed them and wait until the weather broke a little bit before releasing them back into the wild. And so while I was there, I had the opportunity to take part in an expedition down the Bow River near Calgary to monitor the breeding progress of a bird called a Prairie Falcon. I think we spent about 3 or 4 days on the river, basically spotting Iv'es up on the cliff. We would then find a suitable area to climb up on the cliff, peg in at the top, and then abseil down to the nest, where we would send the chicks up to the ringers at the top, and they would ring or band these birds, take biometrics, and then we would put them safely back into their nest. And as a part of that, we also took a Kango and a generator, and so in areas where we felt that there was a big sort of gap in between breeding pairs, we actually put in artificial sites, because luckily these birds can coexist quite in close proximity to each other, feeding mainly on the prairie dogs that on the gophers that were up on the prairies there. So that was my introduction to banding. I did do a little bit more before I left. I went out with a guy called Hardy Pletz. He was actually a Polish truck driver, and but in his free time he would trap and band birds of prey and owls, and I was fortunate enough to go out with him a couple of times, and even one time we went out and trapped snowy owls, which was an incredible thing to witness. So on return to the UK in 1995, I decided to get my ringing permit. I joined the British Trust for Ornithology and got my T permit, and started to learn to ring over in the UK. My year was pretty much the same each year, in that during the spring I would help out with the Bulford Conservation Group on Salisbury Plain, where we were monitoring nest boxes for tawny owl, for barn owl, kestrel. We had and little owl. We had some nest baskets up for long-eared owl, and we also monitored some of the natural sites where we found kestrel, sparrowhawk and buzzard. During the autumn I began my learning about mist netting, and I actually went down to Keysworth near Poole in Dorset first off, and it was here that I actually saw what I would consider my first rare bird here in the UK. which was a Montagu's Harrier. Male Monties came floating over the reed bed while we were out there one day, and that was fantastic to see. But actually, in terms of mist netting, most of my time was spent at Icklesham in East Sussex. I would volunteer there each autumn, where we would be ringing warblers en masse. And we could only do that because we had the right amount of people. The logistics of it were really well thought out, and we would only be opening nets as long as we had the right amount of people to handle, extract, ring and release the bird safely. But I learned lots about mist netting down there. The warblers were things like sedge warbler, reed warbler, chiffchaff, willow warbler. Occasionally we would get wood warbler. You would get blackcap and garden warbler, whitethroat, and occasionally you'd get lesser whitethroat. And here is actually where I twitched my first bird. It wasn't very far, it wasn't very far. In fact, we walked from the site to go and see this bird. We had some Italian bird ringers who were with us, and they had been down to this scrape, and they had spotted a marsh sandpiper, which is a really cool bird, and looks very similar to greenshank at distance, and if you don't get all the features right, but it was actually with some greenshank, so it was great for comparison, seeing structure and bill shape and thickness and things like that. So that was my first twitched bird. But it was here that I really got to see a few rare birds over the years. Not megas, but stuff like marsh warbler. We had Savvy's warbler one year. I always remember extracting my first wryneck from a net ride actually out in a reed bed. It was quite exciting. Ortolan bunting we caught, and the one that really stands out for me was a bird that I was really hoping for, was aquatic warbler. Now I had to extract and ring hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sedge warblers before I came across this bird, but luckily I did, and I extracted it from the net and was allowed to ring it as well. So that was a quite an exciting find. During those 7 years, in between my Bulford conservation commitments and ringing down in East Sussex, I got involved in lots more ringing expeditions and projects. Trip out to the Isle of May out of the Firth of Forth in Scotland, where we helped out with the monitoring of the island seabirds. Specifically, we were targeting Atlantic puffin, and now that was 1997, and I do remember that we retrapped a bird that had been ringed as an adult on the island in 1974. So that was an interesting find. We also were ringing things like razorbill and kittiwake, fulmar. Not fulmar. Fulmar was still on eggs. Shag and guillemot, and also Arctic terns. I did a trip up to Scotland and was helping my friend Dave Butterfield, an RSPB officer up there, while he was checking red-throated and black-throated diver breeding sites. And during that time, that week when I was up there, we went out onto the highlands and we got stuff like capercaillie and black grouse and really cool birds. But while we were up there, we had a few days actually helping out with the wing tagging of red kites. It was the first time that actually Scottish-born red kites were being taken out of the nest and hacked into different areas. I think it was Dumfries and Galloway they were being taken down to. Got to meet Roy Dennis on one of the days, which was a massive honour to meet that man. Also, different stuff like cannon netting down on Canvey Island for brent and for ducks and for shorebirds. Some ringing of avocet chicks out on the Isle of Sheppey was a lot of fun. Nightjar trapping out on Ockham Common, pied wagtail roost during the winter, trapping winter siskins. In fact, actually, one of the birds I'll quickly mention was a bird that I trapped in Ockham, and I extracted it from the net, and I knew immediately it wasn't one of my birds because it was ringed on the other leg. And I looked at the ring and it said Helsinki, and I believe it was the third recovered controlled Helsinki siskin from Finland here in the UK. So that was a very exciting find. A fairly common bird during the the winter, but of course these birds come from Czechoslovakia, from France, from Belgium, from Holland, from Germany during the winter and come over here to the UK. Also nest box projects for blue tits and great tits. I had a couple of trips out to Russia, out to the first year to biological station Rybatchi on the Kurish Spit, where we were helping out with the ringing studies there. There's lots of mist netting going on and night migration monitoring and things like that. And the second year I went back and stayed at Fringilla, which is woodland, and where they use the giant Heligoland or Rybatchi style traps, basically a massive funnel that sat in the mouth of the forest, and as the birds were moving through down the Kurish Spit, some of them were getting move into the trapping area, move up into an aviary system where we would extract and ring the birds. And there was lots of, got to handle and see lots of stuff like long-eared owl, hen harrier, merlin, and stuff like, which are rare over here in the UK, stuff like blue throat, which was lovely to see, redback shrike, things like that. And also, my last sort of trip before moving out to Canada again was to the island of Antikythera, which is one of the sort of the most remote islands in the Aegean. This group of us went across to help out with the Hellenic Ornithological Society's studies that were going on the island during spring. So that was, again, a fantastic experience where we were catching bee eaters and golden oriole, woodchuck shrike, Scops owl, stuff like olivaceous warbler, great reed warbler, Benelli's warbler, pallid harrier, just some crazy stuff, and also lots of stuff like white throat and garden warbler. We were taking biometrics on them and looking at their fat score and things like that on migration. So that was a fantastic experience and got to see some really cool birds. From 2002 up until 2011, I moved out to British Columbia, Canada. British Columbia is Canada's most western province and sits basically between Washington and Alaska, with its coastline on the Pacific Ocean. From 2002 to 2005, I spent in Kelowna, which is within the Okanagan Valley, about a 4-hour drive east of Vancouver. It was here I immersed myself in the local birding and patch watching and got to grips with many wonderful North American species such as sparrows and warblers, kingbirds, shorebirds, hummingbirds, vireos, raptors, and woodpeckers, to name a few. Down in the southern Okanagan, I got a taste of some impressive cliffs, grassland and desert with an assortment of some really special species like sage thrasher, western meadowlark, western bluebirds, brewer's lark and vesper sparrows. Some wonderful stuff like bobolink, yellow-breasted chat, and then in the cliffy areas rock wren and canyon wren, and also stuff like Lewis's woodpecker and black-chinned hummingbird. And that bird has, since those early days, has really expanded its range now. I did initially dabble somewhat in volunteering with at the Vassou banding station, which was really interesting and great to handle some of these fabulous birds. Things like Cassin's vireo, common yellowthroat, yellow warbler, and belted kingfisher, to name a few. But my actual free time was quite limited then, and was working lots of hours and lots of shifts, so I really decided to concentrate on my birding. There was a few days visit up to Tumbler Ridge. It's about a 12-hour drive north of Kelowna. That actually brought a whole different assortment of birds, because it's here where the Rocky Mountains actually get a little bit lower, and so some of those eastern birds that we don't really see down in the valley can mop across the mountains there into that northern part of BC, and some really good stuff, particularly some of the warblers, things like black and white, morning warbler, Connecticut, Cape May, Canada, blackpoll, ovenbird, and also breeding white-throated sparrow and yellow-bellied sapsuckers. So the other one was Baltimore oriole, which was great to see up there. Getting involved with the Kelowna Bird Club and participating in Christmas bird counts, breeding bird surveys, owl surveys and the Meadowlark Festival were also a great way to make new friends and learn much more about the local avifauna. So as you can imagine, with all these incredible species to see and learn about, rare birds weren't really a priority, but I did get to see a few. So firstly, not so much rare birds, but rare to see birds were the owl species. And here there was a great assortment. Great horned owl, one of the sort of larger owl species out there, was fairly common throughout the region, and you'd more often than not hear them, but you would see them on occasion. As with barred owl, that would often give its game away with its amazing call. There were a couple of migrant owls there. The more common of them was the northern saw-whet owl. Go out on owl surveys listening for them, and of course the much more restricted in range and habitat was the wonderful flammulated owl. Western screech owl were there in good numbers, and if you were really lucky, you'd get to see this fantastic creature, and this is great grey owl, and I got to see that on a few occasions, which was wonderful. Another one is the snowy owl, so a rare bird in that part of BC, but fairly regular, and in fact it would often turn up in numbers on the coast, but I think during my time I only saw one or two down in the valley. One owl that I actually found whilst out looking for great horns was a wonderful surprise, and a species that I'd only heard once before, and that was 27 kilometres up a logging road at the beginning of a big day challenge for the Meadowlark Festival, and this is boreal owl. This bird was at the Vernon Tree Farm, sort of north of Kelowna. It was set up about 8 foot up in a fir tree. It was a fantastic moment finding this local but rare to see birds, and after a few phone calls, a few of my friends got to see it too, so that was a great surprise. I did get to see a few rare birds, however, over that time. Things like Sabine's gull, great-tailed grackle, that does breed in the States, but it's sort of much further down, sort of down Texas, I think, southern Texas. But one of them was frequenting a Burger King in Kelowna, so that was quite bizarre to see. White-throated sparrow, a regular bird that turns up in, it does breed in BC, but turns to be seen down in the valley, or at least then. Things have changed since then, but at least then it was a bird that you would occasionally, luckily, find in the winter. Another bird is the Harris's sparrow. This bird breeds up in northern Canada and winters down in sort of mid southern states, but it does turn up on the west coast and in the valley. And the day I saw it, I was out at a place called Salmon Arm on Christmas Tree Island, weird name, and I was with there was a group of us and we'd split up, and I was with the guy called Trevor Forder, and our friend Chris Charlesworth was at the other end of the island, and anyway, he'd spotted a Harris's sparrow, and he really knew that I really wanted to see this bird. So little did I know that he had put me in his scope to watch me react when Trevor gave me the news. And anyway, I you can imagine, sweating and running and your binoculars flying everywhere and your bins, your camera going everywhere and your scope. And anyway, I got out to see this Harris's sparrow. So there's some fantastic sparrows out there. They're a very interesting group, quite tormenting, some of them, but a lot of fun. Northern Shrike, rough-legged hawk were sort of fairly annual. I got my lifer northern hawk owl out there, and I believe it was my 300th bird for North America, so it was quite an iconic bird for that number. It was a wonderful feeling to get that bird as well. And one of the really good birds there was grey-phased gerfalcon, and that, I think it was either there the first and second winter, I think it was 2 winters that it frequented this feedlot on Highway 97. It was where a lot of the grain got spilled on the floor, and it sort of attracted pigeons, and so it was a good food resource for this wintering gerfalcon. And it was it was quite a well-known bird, and even a lot of people from the States who are either doing big years or need it as a lifer would actually make the pilgrimage up to Kelowna to see this bird. So yeah, that was wonderful. 2006 to 2011 was spent on Vancouver Island, which sits off the west coast of Vancouver in the Pacific, about a 2-hour ferry ride from Vancouver to Nanaimo. Here again, I was fortunate enough to be in the company of some fantastic birders, and again I threw myself into the birding community, patch watching and getting involved in many activities like Christmas bird counts, Canada Goose, monitoring programs, the Brant Festival, an incredible helicopter ride, a day of surveying for sandhill cranes, which I'll never forget, the NMT Big Year Challenge, and the British Columbian Breeding Bird Atlas. Birding on the island was very exciting, with some fantastic habitat and sea watching for ducks and geese and loons, gulls, grebes, auks, terns, jaegers, stuff like that. Shorebirds or waders were also a big part of the birding there, with some real crackers, and which will be covered more in a video that I'm going to do about birding in British Columbia. So the first bird I'd like to mention was, it was local in the right habitat but rarely seen, and somewhat of a nemesis for me, and that was white-tailed ptarmigan. These ghosts of the alpine are notoriously difficult to see, unless in some ski areas that could be accessed by car. Then occasionally they would show up, sometimes even in the car park, in numbers, making them very easy to see. However, I wanted to earn this bird the hard way and to climb the mountain, and that's exactly what I did. I got this on the Mount Cain massive near Was, and in terms of effort and was one of the most precious and treasured moments, and I truly felt that that was a really rare bird. Over the years, I did connect with some good birds on the island. A dickcissel in Port Alberni, black-throated blue warbler. One winter that was coming to a suet feeder. Fairly annual American tree sparrow. There was a northern mockingbird, tropical kingbird, which was great, and western kingbird, which is good for the island, was seen. A palm warbler out on the Nanaimo River estuary that was found by my friend John Carter, so that was a fantastic bird. Eastern phoebe, black-headed gull, there I was chasing a black-headed gull mixed up with hundreds and hundreds of Bonaparte's gulls, and 2011 I'm back in England chasing a bloody Bonaparte's gull with all of the black-headed gulls down in Eastbourne. So that happened with a tufted duck as well. I remember twitching a tufted duck out there in Victoria, and of course now it's chasing ringneck ducks over here for your year list. So northern hawk owl, that I got to see another northern hawk owl. That was during the NMT, or non-motorised transportation big year challenge. Quite a mouthful. Basically, it was a year where a group of us decided that we were going to bird only using our push bikes, and have a sort of a little competition to see how many species you could see. So during that, I rode out to Nanaimo Airport from Parksville. I think it's 50 odd. I can't remember. I think it's 50 odd kilometres out there. And I got out to the site, and there was no hawk owl. So I just sort of sat down and, that was it, sort of thing. I didn't know what else to do. There wasn't any other birds out there to chase, but it only took a few more minutes, and the robins started going crazy, and the northern hawk owl came and landed in the snag above me. So again, a fantastic bird. Black-tailed gull, very rare bird. That turned up when I was living in Kelowna, and we actually chased that bird down into Washington, but unfortunately didn't get it. Luckily enough, a few years later, one turned up on Vancouver Island, and that was a bit of a drama as well, trying to connect with that bird because it was moving around quite a lot, but eventually we did get eyes on it, and it was a very exciting day. You can do like a sort of I think you could probably do any type of pelagic out of Vancouver Island, but the two I went on were sort of run out of Tofino, and got to see humpback whale and grey whale and stuff like that, but also I spotted a lovely black-footed albatross on during one of those pelagics, also tufted puffin. Amazing bird to get. Fork-tailed storm petrel, pink-footed shearwaters, was something, and of course you get stuff like marbled murrelet. Going back to the big year challenge, during that I was actually driving back from Nanaimo to Parksville, and decided to stop in at the Englishman River estuary, which is one of my local patches, for a bit of a sneaky recce. I was driving past, I thought, I'm just going to take a quick look, and anyway there was some blue-winged teal there, and I was like, bloody hell, that's brilliant, I need them for the list. So I phoned a couple of people who were also on the challenge, because we always made sure each other knew about good birds to go and see. So I drove home, got my push bike, and rode all the way back for it to count on my big year challenge, and got the blue-winged teal, which was amazing. But then I spotted a godwit. Now, in the time I've spent there, I'd never seen a godwit on the island, and I think if I had initially, I probably would have thought it would be marbled. But anyway, I spotted this godwit, and it was Hudsonian godwit. I believe it was the first for the Nanaimo catchment area. It was a brilliant bird. Of course, it flew off before anyone else got to see it. For most of us, if you find a good bird and that happens, it's just absolutely devastating. But I did get photos, and I put about 3 hours in with Guy Monty trying to find this bird afterwards. It went missing, but fortunately it turned up the next day, and lots of people got to see this bird. It was actually had moved down to Rathdrever, and lots of people got to see it. So brilliant bird to find. A really interesting twitch that I went on while I was out there was for a prairie warbler that I'd only ever seen down in Texas. Anyway, this bird turned up into Fino, out of where I was doing the pelagics, and it turned up and it was feeding in a maple tree outside an apartment block in a car park. So I went down there early doors, sat around waiting for this bird to hopefully show up, and an oriole flew in. And it didn't hang around for long, it just stopped. I got a quick photo, it stopped again, I got another quick photo and was gone. And literally a few minutes later, the prairie warbler turned up, and as you can see, I got a couple of record shots. Awful shots, but good enough. Anyway, Bullock's oriole is the most obvious oriole for the area. They do breed in very small numbers on Vancouver Island, and they are quite well established in the interior. Anyway, it was a couple of days later. I was looking through my photos and I thought, that's not a Bullock's oriole, and but I wasn't sure what oriole it was. I sent it to Guy Monty, who's brilliant birder on the island, very well respected, and a fountain of knowledge for many of us as we've been going up through our birding sort of apprenticeship. And Guy took a look at it, and he had his thoughts on it, but he also wanted it confirmed, to be sure. It turned out to be an adult female orchard oriole. So first for the area, and rarer than the prairie warbler that I twitched. So just lucky to be there. I'm glad I got a couple of photos, for confirmation for the record anyway. But that was a great day. The last rare bird I really want to talk about now is actually down in Washington. I was on a pelagic out there, and obviously hoping for all sorts of shearwaters and petrels and Jaegers and things like that. Anyway, we were right out there. It runs out of Westport, sort of mid-Washington at a Grays Harbour. Goes about 40 miles out to the continental shelf, where it chums or looks for some of these factory fishing vessels which draw in lots of shearwaters and seabirds, things like that. And we were seeing things like black-footed albatross, Cassin's auklet, pink-footed shearwater, flesh-footed shearwater, marbled murrelet, rhinoceros auklet, Heermann's gull, Sabine's gull, all the Jaegers. It was, it's a really good pelagic. And I was watching an adult long-tailed Jaeger fly past with one of the spotters on the boat who has been doing this for years and years and years. Anyway, it sort of flew past us and away, and it seemingly come back towards us, but it was actually a different bird. And I'm sort of looking at it, and you can see this white forehead, and I sort of looked at this guy as if to say, what the hell? And he just started freaking out. He just lost it. He was like, Pterodroma petrel, photos, get photos. Anyway, this petrel just flew in towards us. It did one massive circuit of the boat. I felt sorry for the guy who had seasickness, because we were trying to drag his head up to look, but he just couldn't do it. And anyway, it turned out to be Hawaiian petrel, first ever record for Washington. It was scrutinised as in making sure it wasn't Galapagos afterwards, but it turned out to be Hawaiian. So, again, sometimes you make your own luck, but you're just lucky enough to be there in that moment. I mean, that guy's been a volunteer on that boat however many times he goes out within a year for 20 years, and it's a first for him. So that just shows you how rare it was. In 2011, I returned to the UK, and after settling in and getting familiar again with British birds, I began to twitch a few rarities. But even over the last decade, there has been a period of about 3 years, 2018 to 2020, where I didn't chase anything at all. However, I have had some great twitches, and there's a few I'd like to share with you as examples of how things can go right, and on occasion how things go wrong in terms of twitching. One of the birds I want to share with you is the buff-breasted sandpiper. This was a big dip for me, living down in Surrey in the southeast of England, and having to travel to Anglesey up in North Wales for this bird. I'd been watching it for a while in terms of its movements and its habits over the week leading up to me attempting to go and see it. I was probably four and a half hours into my drive when I got negative news about this bird. But I was only about half an hour shy of getting to the site, so I was going to go there anyway and just have to check it out for myself. So I spent about 3 hours scanning through about 400 European golden plover trying to find this bird, but with no joy. I did notice that a buff-breasted sandpiper was then recorded on the west coast of Ireland, and if you look from Anglesey to where it was seen, it's almost like a direct line west. So whether this bird just picked up the night before and headed west, who knows? I mean, the west coast of Ireland is quite famous for buff-breasted sandpiper. I believe it's almost an annual bird there. But yeah, that was a very, very long drive home. It's a bird I have actually seen out in the States, but yet to see it here. It seems to turn up in Ireland and on the west coast there, and sometimes down in Cornwall. But that was my opportunity to go and see it, and it was a big dip. So yeah, long drive home. The next bird I'd like to talk about is a belted kingfisher, and again I spent some time watching this bird, and its pattern was erratic. It seemed like a really risky twitch, to be honest. It's a long drive up to Preston, and it would show up for a day and it would be gone for two. It would show up 3 times in a day and be gone for 2 days, and it just seemed very, very risky. However, I went up to Frampton Marshes in Lincolnshire to get a second viewing of the white-tailed lapwing that had turned up the previous year. That bird I had chased up to Hull and back in a day, or Hell and back if you've got to come back via the M25. I went for this second viewing and luckily got better looks at this incredible bird, and it was there that a decision had to be made. And that decision was to go for this belted kingfisher. So we headed from Frampton Marsh in Lincolnshire right up to Preston in Lancashire, and via some horrendous roads and getting a flat tyre. But we got there on site, crashed out at a travel lodge for the night, and we were on site for the belted kingfisher the next morning at about 7. There was only 3 of us there, and you actually view the site is you're high up and you're looking down onto a river, and it's quite a long way off, and but luckily within about 10 minutes the bird came rattling down the river. Could hear it first of all, and then got to see it perched up on a different bit of areas. So not great photos or video, but good enough to see what it is. Anyway, it was a fantastic bird to get, and well worth the effort. Another one was the grey-headed lapwing. This is very recently a first for the UK, and that was up north. And I had already arranged to go with a very old pal of mine, Nicky Avenel, up to, he lives out in Australia, and he was here for a visit to go and see Atlantic puffin and some of the razorbills and guillemots up at Bempton. And I sort of talked to him about this grey-headed lapwing, and he felt it was a lot further to go, and I sort of agreed. I didn't want our day that we had planned for almost 4 months now to sort of go negative because we were chasing this bird, and we had planned to spend our day at Bempton. So I booked accommodation for us down in Boston, in Lincolnshire, after going to Bempton, because then that way we would already be like a couple hours nearer to home. We could get up, we were booked into a pub, we could get up the next day, go to Frampton Marsh, have some nice casual birding, and then head home. So early doors, we headed up to Bempton Cliffs, and it was lovely, brilliant morning. The getting puffin was quite tough actually. I think we only got 2 birds on the cliff, and that took some looking for. So maybe a lot of them were at sea, maybe the other half of the pair was in the burrow, but it wasn't easy getting these puffins. But we got them, and that was brilliant. Anyway, we got most of the birds that we had gone up to see within about 40 minutes, and Mick sort of turned around to me and said, I know you really want to see this grey-headed lapwing, do you want to go for it? And I said to him, do you know what that means? I know what that means, but do you know what that means? Because we still got another, whatever it was, 3 hours drive north from Bempton to get up to the site. And then because I'd booked accommodation further south, we had then another 4-hour trip on top of that to get back to our accommodation. Anyway, we both convinced each other and went for it. Once we actually got to the site, it was the mist had really rolled in. We took a wrong path from the car park to go and see the bird. Anyway, cut a long story short, we finally got out to the site. There was about 8 people there, and a bird apparently had flown about half an hour before. So yeah, the mood wasn't great, but probably about 10 minutes later, this lady that we had actually bumped into and walked up with said, oh, I think I've got the bird, and we got onto the scope and we got the bird. So we did get our grey-headed lapwing, which was a fantastic bird to get here for the UK. Anyway, then which was good because we had a 4-hour drive back to our accommodation, which was a pub, and we were something like 10 minutes shy of the pub, and the landlord had phoned us and said, where are you? I said, well, we're about 10 minutes away, because he said, because we're closing the pub. And we were like, what do you mean you're closing the pub? The whole reason we've booked the pub is so that we can have a bite to eat and a pint after our day's birding. That was a part of our thing. And it was because they never had much custom. I think the fair was in town and no one was drinking. And so anyway, when we turned up at the pub, Mick isn't a small fella, and I think he made it clear that we really wanted a pint. And in fairness to them, they gave us 3 pints each on the house, so we were happy. And then we went birding the next day at Frampton and got some cool stuff. We actually got blue-winged teal down there and black-winged stilt, which was quite nice as well. So that was a sort of spur-of-the-moment thing as well, very poorly planned, but with a great outcome for a long twitch. And the sort of final bird I want to talk about here is Terek Sandpiper. I can't remember I think it was 2015, I can't remember. But anyway, I was going for this Terek Sandpiper. It was a Sunday, and I shouldn't have been going for it. I should have been doing DIY or whatever. I shouldn't have been going for this bird, but anyway, I went for the bird. And I travelled down to Church Norton, so it's not that far, probably an hour and a half or something from here, down on the south coast. And it was a big lesson, that was. I got within probably about 20 minutes of the site, and I got negative news come through. And I was just thought, what am I doing? This is just nuts. You know, I'm chasing this bird, it's not even there. I should be doing other stuff. And I turned around. I got stuck in traffic. I'd hardly any petrol. I'd run out of fags. I had a full bladder. And I got stuck in traffic. And the rare bird alert went off and said that the Terex sandpiper had turned up and it was showing well and putting on this great. And I was so angry. I was just not at the bird, at myself. Just so angry that I had made that decision. And anyway, that was it. I was stuck and there was nothing I could do about it. And I never got the bird. So anyway, the next day I was at work and there was news still coming through. This Terex was showing up. And that was it. Straight after work, jumped straight in the car and drove straight down to Church Norton. Same scenario, got stuck in rush hour traffic getting down there. Finally got to the site. Nightmare to park. Finally got parked, and then you got to walk this shingle beach out to the area where it's been seen. And for those of you who've walked in shingle, it's horrendous. It's particularly when you're flapping and you've got a scope and your camera and your bins and you're trying to speed walk out to this site because you don't want to miss this bird. And, you know, I'm sweating and it's just like walking through quicksand. Anyway, there's another guy walking back towards me and I'm like looking at him and I was thinking, don't even say those words. You know, should have been here 5 minutes ago, mate. It flew, and the bird's flown. So anyway, I tried not to take it out on him. I got to the site and I was there about 20 minutes and I was just completely gutted, devastated. I really, really wanted to see this Terex sandpiper. Anyway, luckily the bird flew in and I got to see it. But it was a massive lesson to me. A massive lesson that you have to stay committed when you're going for these birds. And I know negative news can really mess with your head. But if you're that far into it, bar the bird sort of being eaten by a peregrine or shot or something, you need to stay on point and carry on and ignore that negative news and just go for it. It doesn't always work out, there's not always a happy ending, but you'll kick yourself if you turn around and I sort of almost feel better if I've gone for a bird and miss it, than if I'm actually debating it and don't go for it and it turns up. So, well, let's put it this way: if you don't go for them, you'll always miss 100% of everything. So I think that as long as you're accepting of the fact that dips go hand in hand with the euphoria of getting these birds, you won't go far wrong. So in episode 2, you'll see where things went right, and I was able to connect with some of these wonderful rarities.